I was hoping I can convince Christian to go in one of the next employee meetings presenting company memory in a way that I said, hey, I will now say something, and what I'm saying is converted into company memory and takes effect immediately. Such as, every time you ask, can I get a pay rise? The answer is yes. It shouldn't be a problem, right? To convert something into your company memory. I want this to be active as of now. And everyone who's using this piece of knowledge is immediately impacted.
Navigating an SAP transformation? We get it. By day, we work hands-on with people like you across the globe. By night, we share what actually works. Welcome to Transformation Every Day with Alexander Greb and Johannes Langguth, where your complex transformation becomes clear, actionable, and achievable.
There's a version of your company that exists nowhere in your systems. It's the reason you deliver to one customer differently than to all the others, and someone in planning quietly ignores the red due date because they know that account and they know it will be fine. It's not documented, it was never modeled, and it's probably the biggest single reason you win business. Now, think about handing that work to agents. What are they actually grounded in? At SAPPHIRE this year, I heard the answer, or at least the start of one, and it made me nearly jump out of my seat. 2 words: company memory. Today I have the 2 people who are at the center of it. Andreas Breitrück and Theiss from SAP, who went from first idea in January to main keynote stage in May. We talk about what it really is, how you govern it, why it might be the thing that makes business AI finally act in your company's sense, and what happens to organizations that skip this step entirely. Let's get into it. My name is Alexander Greb, and this is Transformation Every Day.
Yeah, maybe. Perfect. My father drove it at any condition, at any time of the year, which I think people in the 60s were just a little bit harder, tougher, you know?
They
just
different bunch.
Yeah.
But not only 60s, also 90s. Car, right? Mm-hmm. Exactly. And in the next years, you will see people who will not be able to enter a car without using its autonomous capabilities.
Or company memory.
Autonomous and company memory is a good starting point, because we're recording. Surprise, surprise. And we have 2 very special guests today here in an episode which I was really looking forward, because it's quite special for me. And before I give you the possibility to introduce yourself, let me say 2 sentences about the purpose of that, because I'm today a pure student. Yeah, because this is a topic I'm hugely interested in, and I will follow up with what this is all about and why I come over like this. But it's company memory. And company memory is, I think, one of the most interesting topics within the whole autonomous enterprise, AI. How do I get agents to work at all and bringing me value stuff and so on. And I'm really happy to have you here today to enlighten me, of course, and of course also our listeners, Theiss and Andreas. Great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. Thanks for all of this. Yeah, let's go.
Definitely. Andreas, Theiss, can you, everybody or each of you, say 2 or 3 sentences about yourself?
I'll start. Yeah, I'm Theiss. I work at Signavio. I lead technically, we call it lead architect, but I lead, so to speak, from a technology perspective where we use AI. And I'm building interesting things. I like the company memory. It's one of the ideas I had at the beginning of the year. And it's pretty exciting to see where we are already and where I think it's going. And the most important thing, or most exciting thing for me is to see that what we thought would solve a real problem seems to be really right on the head. And yeah, I'm really happy to talk to you and to talk a little bit about the ideas, because they're not obvious, I think. And I think it's important for the listeners and for companies kind of to prepare for this kind of next era of how we run businesses. And yeah, I hope we can play a role there.
Nice.
Thank you.
And I'm Andreas. An old time at SAP. I always worked with customers, so I always looked at SAP from the outside. I studied physics. That's a commonality between Theiss and myself. We got to know each other back in 2017. The reason why he's here is because I got him back to SAP, and that was pretty important. I have a strange title, which means nothing. I consider myself as some sort of an influencer within SAP and outside, because all I'm doing is literally I'm talking to customers, I'm talking to colleagues, I'm collecting ideas, and I'm trying to socialize ideas, building prototypes, doing all sorts of things. And I'm just super grateful to have the opportunity to work with Theiss and many others who work on this pretty crazy thing that we call company memory. And I'm just a tiny little thing in the machine.
But you know, in most of the cases, the tiniest things are the one who decide over do or break. So we are happy to
And the
have you here
gearbox
today.
and everywhere. You don't want to have the tiny things, you know?
Great, guys. Let me tell you a short story that I was referring to in the beginning. And the short story is when I was sitting this year at the SAPPHIRE, and there was a big keynote of Christian Klein and then later by Philipp Herzig concerning the strategy and the idea, the vision, and the details about the autonomous enterprise. I really made almost a jump at a certain part of it when something came in, because everybody, of course, was asking themselves, okay, the platform, the data, all of that is very important and so on. But still everybody was asking like, okay, but how do we manage within the autonomous enterprise to make agents a part, an insider of the company, a part of the insider level? Yeah, like when I ask the agent or I ask an LM a thing, or an agent has to work with a task, how does he do it really the way the company, in its strategy, in its culture, in its personality, would solve a problem, for example. And then at a certain point of the keynotes, they started to mention the company memory. And this was where not only myself, but also the people who were sitting next to me suddenly like, what is that? What did they say? So you could really say it was a serious, sorry for the wording, WTF moment for a lot of people who said, and they were talking and whispering to each other like, Jesus, what is that? That's interesting. Now we are at it where it really becomes interesting, and so on. Were you aware when you were talking first, or when you were considering first this kind of topic, company memory, how important it could be for the whole concept, not only of the autonomous enterprise, but how to make AI actually work within an ERP space?
I'll take that. Andy, Andreas, and I, we've been trying to apply AI to processes, I think, for 10 years now, you could say, more or less. And we had our fair share of learnings. And one of them is if you implement automation, right? And we were focusing on machine learning, like these machines learning how you do something, bringing it into their internal kind of weights. It's what it's called, right? That if you do that while you automate, you'll use this transparency. And then you have this automated, but it's kind of rigid, right? So now you have this part of the process automated, but you kind of automated it in a way how it was done before. And then when you want to do a change, you realize that it gets tricky because this machine, you can't tell it, or you couldn't tell it, I want this to change. So you would end up with these situations which are tricky to resolve. And I think we had kind of a eureka moment beginning of the year when we saw that with these large language models, because you operate on language and because they can kind of explain their reasoning, these models can now also reason, they can explain their reasoning. You get into this very interesting situation where you can simply explain kind of in language what you want to change or what you want to adapt. And they can explain in language back to you if this makes sense or if they get it. And then you can kind of follow what they're doing. And when Andreas and I then discussed this, say this is kind of the experience that we saw. And when we try to kind of have them remember things about how a process is run, you actually kind of can understand what did it take away from this. You can understand it and you can interpret it. And then the most important part is, I think, for the business, you can control it, right? You can govern it. It becomes transparent. And that was something that we couldn't do before. And I think for Andy and me, probably we kind of understood at that point, this could be a pretty big game changer because it could allow you, right, to automate while trying to stay in the driver's seat, while still being able to say, I need to change this process, although we've automated it. I'm not locked into how it is we are currently doing it. And I can communicate, I can still phrase my requirements in what I'm used to, which is natural language. And it becomes a more humane, like a more human technology, right? Give someone these models which, don't talk to you. It doesn't feel very natural, right? They just take some decisions very hard to understand. And I think we kind of got that, but probably because of that experience. I would say it probably clicked when we had something working and we gave it to people. And then, they just got the idea immediately. And usually when you have these ideas, these new innovations, usually it takes some time for people to figure out why this is useful. And I think we had the experience that they either got the idea really quickly, and then when playing with it, people very quickly find a use case for them and say, hey, can I do that? Try it out, see if it works. And we saw also some, I guess, very interesting use cases which we didn't see. Probably Andy can talk more about that. But we had a feeling that it could be important. I think I'm very happy that it got the reception, because if you think kind of about the crown jewels of a company, right? That's how you differentiate, how you run, why you do certain things, prioritize A over B. And how these technology revolutions happen is they kind of are chaotic and they just go, go, go.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Theiss, I love the point. I love the point on this, on the explainability thing. See, when I remember when we started doing things, if you ask the question, the answer may have been 0.74. Okay, why 0.74? There's no explanation, right? There's nothing like this. But all of a sudden, there was an experiment that the guys did, I think, early in the year in Palo Alto. We have a major initiative within SAP that actually is kind of reshaping the whole organization, I think. It runs under the name of All In on AI. So many people are working there. And there was this one moment, Theiss, I think, when on a one-time, it was like a one-time learning out of like a human, there was a decision done by an agent, the human changed something from A to B, and then you try to learn, you try to understand, hey, why was I wrong in the first place? Here's what I need to do better. And I think this was the moment to say, hey, hold on, you can have an explanation on all of a sudden say, I need to alter the way I'm doing things because I've observed the following pattern, or maybe because I was instructed to do it differently. So all of a sudden this becomes explainable, understandable, and influenceable. And I think the minute we saw this, and you were super excited, I think everyone was super excited. I think also Muhammad Alam was getting extremely excited, and this took off like crazy, right? All the ideas and thoughts and all the work that then started to happen. But I think it was at the beginning of the year, right? This was a real strange moment.
Hi there. Quick break for a short message before we go right back to the episode. Enjoying the insights and stories on transformation every day? Want to make sure you never miss an episode packed with practical tips and best practices from the SAP world, featuring conversations with some of the most interesting people in the SAP universe? Then hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform, whether it is Apple, Spotify, or any other you use. And if our podcast brings you value, we would be incredibly grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us. Thanks so much and happy listening.
But also then crazy that when you had the idea in the beginning of the year, you already have it just a few months later on stage, on main stage, in the main keynote at SAPPHIRE, which is also crazy, of course.
Yeah, I think it's a testament how quickly you can do something if you really put your mind behind it. And then it's also, I think AI allows us to do things quicker, but you need a lot of focus and you need to know where you're going. But I agree, right? It's a very aggressive timeline.
But if I say this, Alex, the reality is, the team created this thing. We called it company DNA in the first place. We had many different names. We were just describing. We had nightly endless calls to think, hey, what is it we are building here? And we had this concept of the process atoms that we revealed last year. So all of a sudden, this all sparked so much imagination. And it was literally, I think, 2.5 or 3 weeks prior to Sapphire, and Sapphire being our largest event, as you may recall. Like everything is well organized, well prepared, months in advance. And then 2.5 weeks prior to Sapphire, 3 weeks in a meeting I think that happened in New York. And we actually said, hey, Christian, we better bring this topic to the keynote. And it was Christian, so our CEO, listening into it and said, I get it. We better do. So this was, I mean, very, very unusual also on how normally SAP would behave on something like this. This is just
any company of that size.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. But it's great that it managed to get in there. But because I think if there was somebody who would like to criticize the concept during the Sapphire, because of maybe it's okay, it sounds really still just being on slide decks and so on. With the company memory, it really got that kind of connection to, hey, this is the hidden essence, which makes this actually run, which gives it credibility, and is, let's say, this kind of final brick into something what Theiss correctly said. Yeah, it goes into the crown jewels, because if we ask ourselves what are the crown jewels which makes a company's, let's say, differ from others. Yeah, of course, we have a lot of the parts is process definitions and so on, but also a lot is the people. Yeah, like, because they have these kinds of clever planners who know their customers, who know, like, okay, we can optimize our distribution schedule, for example, because we know in our systems, in our data, maybe there's this kind of, let's say, we have kind of material demand for this customer, which is set because of the due date on very, very, very urgent. But because we know that this customer works like this and that, we can solve this problem not with the, let's say, most expensive express delivery solution, but with a more cost-effective solution, which still make them happy because we know the customer. So this kind of, let's say, special rules, which are nowhere in the system really, but they are, you can get it out of because of behaviors. Yeah, this is something which was in the past completely untouched, and I think this is a huge part of what makes companies special and what makes companies individual, also in a, let's say, unfair or competitive advantage way, and which has in the past not really been grabbed by systems at all.
Alex, if you look at it, do you know, I started to think, do you know, me as an ERP person, you think, well, we're configuring a system to support processes across all different, let's say, countries, variants of particular processes. We are setting up sales order types, 100, and we are setting up 200 item categories, and then somehow they all serve a particular purpose and they all build for something. But at the end of the day, oftentimes also people use processes slightly different, right? Sometimes, well, if you do then the measurements and you ask yourself, why are they doing it that way, this way? Why are they failing to use a particular capability that is out there? And if you would talk to people, they would explain this to you. They would explain that we can't use it this way. And I started to think, hey, where do we have the process reality? Is the process reality what we've configured in a system? The answer is partially. Is process reality in what we think we have documented in processes, process models? That's the cool thing. But ultimately, you may end up stating, maybe we have modeled process highways. Maybe we have not modeled the small country roads, or let's say the tiny little things that interconnect the little hills. So, and then you ask people, and what you are just describing is one of the essential elements, which is, we would call it tribal knowledge. So what sits in people's heads that you need to have in order to understand how processes really go. But there's then also many other things. Like, look, who has built standard operating procedures into an ERP system? Hardly anyone. Like, who has put emails on particular decisions that were made at one point of time to the other? Is this somewhere in the system? No. So you end up realizing there's so much more to reality on how processes are run than we can find in a system, but if we have this dream of a system that understands the situation it's in, that it understands, I mean, how the organization wants to behave or wants to do things in a particular environment, then you somehow need to figure out, how do I grab this knowledge and how do I make this accessible to a system, right? So that's the fascinating. It's almost like one of the missing pieces that it's out there, but you couldn't grab it. And we think we're getting to this stage to say, tell the system what you want. Tell me more. Show me things, or let me ask you if I observe something that's strange. Maybe you're doing something that I didn't expect. So explain to me a little bit why. All these sort of things. If you can learn so much about who you are and how you do things. And maybe you also find unpleasant things, but that's the meta layer. But somehow all this needs to be put into a product, which is a complete different ballgame. And that's for
I
the
think,
smart people, not me.
I had a
Alex, you said,
Yep.
I think you mentioned, right, you would need to kind of, like the missing piece, how do you get these things part of the organization, right? And the truth is, you need to onboard them very similarly how you would onboard a person. Because like what these models know is like all the general stuff about process. But of course, they don't know how your company runs, right? You can do that, by the way, with every agent. You could have someone hold their hand and then explain them, and they can probably learn it, figure it out. You do that again for this other guy and that other guy. But ideally, that wouldn't be that will probably solve it. But then you kind of, on the one hand side, do this many times. And it's very hard then to control still, right? So you have these things that you onboarded into your organization that behave similarly as people, right? You trained them, you onboarded them. Now you get an email. This is now priority. I need to change this. Now you need to find them in your organization. You need to retrain them. You need to make sure everyone follows this new thing. And this is also one of the things that we're excited about, that we think if you try to do this in a more structured and organized way and kind of onboard this knowledge centrally and see that agents can consume it and act on it, then you can change it and manage it centrally. They can reason better about it. Then you can have these more, let's say, educated decisions that you're taking because you're making the implicit explicit, right? So that, and you're not making it just explicit in a way that it's kind of, you're taking note of it, but ideally you would want these agents to act on it, right? So it kind of becomes the process. And by making it explicit, collecting it from different sources, collecting it from these agents, have people reason about it, say, okay, this is a behavior that improves a certain KPI. This is what we want to operationalize. It gives you this different way to kind of steer the organization, right? Whereas you would have to do change management not only for the people, but for the agents, right? You can do it centrally in company memory, reason about, okay, this is what I want. If we need to tighten the belt on travel spend, right? I do want to put in certain things in terms of how we do this now, right? Make sure that your new kind of organization or part of this organization just naturally knows this and follows it. And I think that's exciting, but we need to get there.
Absolutely. And I had a conversation recently with a board member of a customer of mine, and he said something quite interesting, which I think very, very good fits into that story, because he said, we had in the last 10 years many stories, especially in Germany, about companies who used to be very strong, who used to be innovative, who used to be at top of their game, and somehow, for some reason, lost their mojo. And I think if you look like in the automotive industry and so on, you find a lot of these kinds of examples where I said like, okay, the products or the way they did their business or the customer interaction and so on, it's not like it was before. Yeah, somehow it's different now and so on. And you cannot blame everything on, let's say, external disruption or whatever. Yeah, there has to be also happened something like internally where some knowledge, some tribal knowledge, got lost, obviously. Yeah, because it's done now differently, and definitely not better or more innovative and so on, but just differently, and in most of the cases worse. And he was coming to the point that he said, like, of course, most of these things which lead to that kind of, yeah, let's say, loss of mojo is because of things which were not in the systems, not in an ERP and so on, because certain ways of doing things are not necessarily part of the ERP. And what he stated, because we then switched the conversation onto the company memory, was also, let's say, a certain hope of saying, like, maybe we can, by this, by company memory, we can, and you called it in the first part DNA, but we can more or less like conserve this kind of DNA. Hey, what is really our culture? What are the things that we maybe do not do by thought each day, but identify us as the company that we are, and as the culture we are, even though people change, people come, and people go.
But Alex, also let's be realistic. I mean, somehow, I mean, it's on this topic. It's so easy to go not over the top. I don't think there is a top. I think you can go as big as you want to think, and you could actually think, look, if we get everything right, some people may argue, will you still need a CEO, or can you give the CEO task to an agent because he's actually grounded in any way that the organization is? You just tell the agent what you want to do. So you can think it overly big. But we can also say let's be realistic. Let's be realistic on where we start and how we capture knowledge and how we do this. And I think one of the learnings, one of the first things the team have built is, remember we came up with this concept of the process atom within Signavio. The process atom was a theoretical description of something that allows you to do something that we call modelless conformance. So you have an event log, but you may say, there are certain aspects, look, that I don't want to see or I would want to spot. So you describe these sort of things, and then you would have applied an atom to an event log, and then you would have seen, hey, I see that there's something happening that you either want or you don't want. But leveraging this process atom idea helped us also to build on company memory, because ultimately the knowledge unit, or let's say the place in where we store knowledge, is what we call a process atom. All the process atoms all together make up the summary of what the organization is. But look, there's many open questions, like how do these things interrelate? And if you think of it as like a brain, or if you look into, maybe my head is different than others, but look, there's learned patterns, and some parts of your brain, they control your movements. So when you're on your bicycle and when you're going downhill, and some of the other things, they tell you you're good to go to jump. Alex, I hope you don't, you know your limits. So different pieces in your brain also, it's learned behavior. There's also like your experience in the do's and don'ts. So we think there's actually even different compartments almost, and different types of atoms that serve different purposes. Some of the atoms will have clear owners. Right? There's somebody who ultimately says, do you know what? I will not do I will not sell anything if I'm not having a margin bigger than 7%. And that's maybe the role of somebody who is in charge to take this decision. This is not everyone's decision. Whereas there are other findings, atoms, sort of implicit knowledge that you've learned by observing and asking people. So some of the pieces will be controllable, will have owners, will also have like a governance model to say who's allowed to change this. Other things will be learned. And also, if you ask us how many atoms make a company memory, the answer is we don't know.
Yeah,
We,
sure.
we don't know. We have no clue. But we've got to do it, right? We've got to collect these things. And Theiss and the team, they build something like at the speed of light. And I think this was like incredible, because you said, they started in January and we announced it in May. We did not announce it only, but there is an app. There is a company memory app everyone can touch, and we are now giving it actually to customers. By the way, that's something real, tangible. And we've had the banana policy. Somebody created a fictitious banana policy and said, hey, can we convert a banana policy into company memory to make sure that everyone follows the banana policy? And that even became one of the large examples we showed. I think it was another fruit, but my idea was the banana policy. But hey, look, there's so many things we don't know. But there's already a
Mhm.
tool that creates these, it helps you, creates these atoms, works with you. You can put in your SOPs, you can put in a transcript. Maybe we should take a transcript from our discussion and convert it into Alex Greb's podcast memory. And so say, hey, and then you can work with it and you have a particular task. And then there's something that the team has built that we call a validator agent for a human being to work with company memory. So you could describe a particular thing. Hey, I'm observing this, or am I allowed to do that? Or I want to do this. Hey, how does that look like? And the tool clearly then says, hey, based in my learned knowledge on everything I have, here's what's relevant. And if you see this happening, if you see how you can synthesize this knowledge and how you can use it, the minute you touch it, it gets completely seductive. It's just like, okay, this is really, and the technical concepts behind are anything than trivial. So this is not like in Cloud Code where you
Yeah.
have a folder structure and you put in a few documents and then you just nicely chat with Cloud Code about your documents. Hey, maybe
Mhm.
yeah, it works. It works for Cloud Code. That's all cool. But this thing is much bigger. And the minute we've actually shown the validator agent, and everything we've ever shown is real. So think of it, everything we've shown is not a fake. But do we know it all? How this all turns out? No.
Absolutely.
I think one of the
Definitely.
things that
Uh-huh.
surprised me, Andreas touched on this topic of how we manage this knowledge as these smallest bits. So we try to define kind of, hey, your small bit of knowledge. And we manage in the sense of someone can take a look at it and change it. But that's kind of the smallest unit. And we do that so we make it comparable, right? So if you have something in an SOP or a policy and you observe something in a discussion or from an agent, that you pull out that knowledge and you can compare. In the SOP it states this, right? But we can compare the smallest bit of knowledge, which also comes from this, and it's the same. Then you kind of know, hey, I'm doing it actually how I want to. And I think for like the things that are configurable in an ERP, that's probably not too exciting, but these agents will do much more, right? They will have to reason about actual decisions. Think about there's this priority and this other priority. Under what circumstances is what's more important? Am I allowed to take this exceptional path yet? Do I need to involve someone who can tell me what's the right path is, or can I go alone here and do what's kind of the safe path? And I think what I found pretty exciting was when we got to this kind of critical mass, so we built these systems that like synthesize this knowledge from all kinds of different input. And when we put like enough of it in, you could describe a situation, right? I have this, some situation. My data center is burning. I need to buy a GPU. I call the guy I know, shipped it to me. It's here. I get an invoice. Somehow the system doesn't let me invoice it. And you can ask this question. It will tell you about everything that it knows about SAP. What's your path back to something that is compliant? And how do you get this invoice actually paid? And this is probably one of the simpler problems. But what I found very interesting is that these language models can plan on top of this information. So they can kind of see the paths, okay, based on this information that I have here. Usually you would have to take these 3 steps, get an exception for this, then you're back on the highway. Or you should probably, based on this knowledge that we found, talk to this person and discuss this exception. And it requires someone to have a look at it. You're not going to do this in the system. And I think that I thought was really exciting and something that I wouldn't have expected, so to speak, right? That if you try to make an effort of putting a lot of how you run in, right? And I think it's important to also bring this implicit knowledge in, right? How you reason about a problem, when are you willing to allow for things that you're not necessarily configuring, right? Then it gets really interesting, and we saw, I think, very, very cool and very exciting examples. And then you mentioned how the brain works, right? In the brain, we have a part which kind of stores the facts, and we have the brain that tries to remember how things are done. And I always say, I don't need to worry about managing or thinking about what the paint of my car is. I just know, right? But how I drive my car, that needs updating. certainly, right? If something changes, like if I get an electric car, it behaves a little bit different. But if something from the law changes, I would need updating of that knowledge, right? It's so to speak much more complex, much harder to describe knowledge, right? It's very easy to say the car is red, and that's kind of what we have in the system of record, right? In the system of record, we have things that are relatively easy to understand, like these are the suppliers, this is the contracts, this is what I can buy, this is not. But what's really tough is the things that we have in our heads about how we then use all these tools to make something work. And I think that's really what we need to gather, make explicit for agents to work. And that is also, I think, very important information to look at as a company and say, I don't want to throw this necessarily into this black hole of an LLM provider. Because it's your crown jewels. And if you do it right, and you do it in a way that you still own this data and that you can manage it, and your business understands it, I think that's the important part that we at least see. We want to make it in a way that you still have this transparency and control over this. Because then, you can probably also have more sovereignty. It's at least something that I think about, right? We in Europe haven't really figured out this AI thing from a LLM provider, from like the people that built the AI. And we've seen this with the US government saying, okay, not accessing these models anymore, they're too dangerous, right?
Exactly.
And it gets you to think, right? It gets you to think, how do we get it in a sovereign way? And I think for companies in particular, it's important to think about what is the part that I need to still take control of, I need to manage actively. Like, what is my organization doing in this age of AI, so to speak? And how can I differentiate and not give this away, right? And I think there's really important to say, okay, the business needs to stay in control. There has to be transparency on what is it actually we want to do and how, what do we prioritize, what are the things that we allow versus not allow, where do I need to be involved versus I don't need to be involved. And that's where we want to take it. And I think it's an interesting journey as well, right? Because it's so often with these topics, it's a lot of change management as well, right? Just building an app or a technology that works, right? It's not even half the way there for a company trying to apply it, right? It's a lot of change management. It's getting people to understand how to really work with it, how to build an organization around it, how to build a practice around it, seeing what works, what doesn't, defining this is how it works for us. This is what we actually need to take care of, or where we don't need to worry too much about it. This just works, right? Or I also think when I think about this onboarding, right? If you onboard a new employee, right, you usually don't give it the highest level task right away, right? You kind of start and let it do things where okay, we can, in this phase, you have your onboarding buddy, right? You have your onboarding buddy, and your onboarding buddy, is holding your hand here, and we let you graduate. We let you kind of take over more and more important things. And I think it will be very similar here, not from a just organizational perspective, but also how we apply this technology, right? And I think particularly for the business, it's going to be important. Imagine you have, as a head of finance in your organization, these agents and your employees, and someone calls you and says that you need to change this, right? In the org where you just have humans, you just call someone that is responsible for it, and they can make it work. They can write an email to everyone. We need to do this differently starting today. And what I want for the business to be able is to say, I can still do this. I can still have that much control on my process in the work where agents run it, right? And that, for me, just feels like that should mean you take very good care of this knowledge and treat it as something that you actively have to manage. And that might mean that there's, people whose main concern is that. And they're probably experts in understanding processes, understanding the organization, actually doing this. And they would kind of first probably have to learn also, what does this agent know? What can it do without me? What doesn't it? Okay, for what it can do, I need to make these things explicit and complementary. And now this agent can pick it up and work on it. But then I at least also know if this needs to change, where I need to go and say, okay, let's change these ways of working on us. That's really where I think, if you look at it, kind of where we can take it back to the sovereignty, staying sovereign, right? Where we can probably also reap the benefits of these models without having to always use the best model. Because for me, the important part is that it knows the organization, how it works, how your business runs. And that's probably very important in the future.
Theiss, you mentioned, I think there's something that I love the word. A few months back, you actually came up in one of the walks in the woods with we always take the dogs to the woods, and that's maybe the coolest spots we can have a chat in. And Theiss was coming up with this concept of we both studied physics, so we like a term like the invariant. There's invariance in every organization, and an invariant of the organization means something that will not change. Whatever happens, this will not change. And to me, this thing about you will not give up control, right? Or you would only delegate to someone you trust. Right? But at the same time, this technology, I mean, even today, and who knows how it's going to be in 2 years, 3 years from now? I mean, who knows this? Is giving you so many different opportunities that I'm just thinking, what if everyone is so excited about building agents and we're using, well, maybe there are not that many agents in core business operations as of now. Hopefully this changes. But let's assume we would see a growing amount of agents being built by all sorts of different people. And let's also be honest, not everything is SAP, right? You will build this with whatever you have. There will be different tools. But Alex, since you're always talking about also how well the journey from an old world into a new ERP world, the S4 transformations, and we've been there and you've seen this, and we see so many organizations.
Yeah.
Imagine the following situation. Imagine no one comes up with this concept of company memory, but everyone who builds an agent today tries to squeeze in all the knowledge it needs to know into this particular agent. And let's assume you have 1,000 agents, somehow doing different things. And now you want to change the behavior of your organization. And I think what you consider hard today, if you have not a central control over agents, you will wish you would be back in times to do
S4
a
transformation.
massive S4 transformation. Because if this is not done well,
Yeah.
you are dying, right? You
Yeah.
are stuck. You are stuck in this. That's why I also fundamentally believe to say we need to come up with ways like the agent hub and DNAX to say, well, hey, what if during design time of an agent, should you be hooked up to company memory, yes or no? Are you performing a task that is relevant, yes or no? Maybe yes, or maybe not. But if you are, do you always need to consider the latest and the greatest updates of your boss? And maybe yes, or maybe in some circumstances. So think of this also to say, we also need to centrally govern agents, not only to say, should you use this? And see, to me, I'm crazy, you know? I was hoping I can convince Christian to go in one of the next employee meetings presenting company memory in a way that I said, hey, I will now say something, and what I'm saying is converted into company memory and takes effect immediately. Such as everyone should get every time you ask, can I get a pay rise? The answer is yes. Yes, you can, 10%, right? Maybe. So think of it. So technically, it shouldn't be a problem, right? To convert something into your company memory. I want this to be active as of now. And everyone who's using this piece of knowledge is immediately impacted. So you would actually do real-time business transformation, like at a level that I would say is feasible, but at the same time, no organization would do anything like this. This would mean like going to a production ERP system, opening it up for customization, do a non-transport, but do the customizing change, and then no one does it. We are also obsessed about testing, making sure it works well, putting it into releases, all the risk topics, everything that's associated. So while the technology gives this potentially incredible opportunity for change, okay, I'm influencing everything I do by just, I'm just saying what I want. I'm saying what I want, and this thing takes effect. I'm wondering, will organizations ever be capable to work this way? And right now, I don't think we all have to learn, right? We need to figure out, hey, okay, now that we have this muscle, can we use it? Are we brave enough to use it? Is it controllable enough? Do we have control over it? Can we govern it? Hey, while it's so fascinating and so transformative at the same time, the question is really, are we ready? Who's ready for something like this?
Andreas, our conversations at some points, they always get a little bit into dystopian futures and so on. But you're absolutely right. Yeah, when you think of, and I'm often using this example of that big German 70 ERP systems, and they are stuck in their transformations now for over a decade because they do not know if I do change something on the right side, and I cut off something there,
And I
does
feel
something
so sorry.
fall down?
I feel so
Exactly.
sorry about this.
And now imagine 10, 15, 20 years on, you have everything clustered with agents and so on, and you have the same problems with agents. Yeah. This is absolutely crazy, and you're right, because then it's then the phase when the TPS reports are gone. You know, the Office Space movie stuff. The TPS reports are gone. You do everything with agents. Governance gets a complete different topic there, and maybe this is also, of course, the questions that many people that rise when you talk about company memory. How do I govern this then in the end? Because company memory means in a certain way that this may be one of the big steps to hand over more or less manual work done by people into an AI-based technology and so on. But how do you keep this under control?
So we think,
imagine
it's
like
going to be new jobs.
Yeah,
Alex, there's going to be jobs we don't have today.
Exactly.
So organizations will have roles and responsibilities and new ways of doing things that do not exist today. They
I think
every
partially
technology.
they exist. I just don't think that because you do, of course, people, or you have Six Sigma, you try to improve processes, reason about how can do this better. The reason why you do processes is because you want to improve the organization, right? But probably the leverage is just so much bigger that it makes sense to invest more from a people perspective. I think it could also be just a very leveraged job in that sense, right? Where if you are really good at it, you could have a really big impact for the company, right? And it can, of course, become a differentiating. Like you said it in muscle. What we mean is kind of this change management muscle, right? But it's a capability that if you can do it, right, it's very powerful because the world will not change slower, right? That's for certain. I think that's been said so often. But if you work in software, you feel it. We feel it for sure, right? If you work in engineering and software, you feel how rapidly things are changing, and the teams that can adapt, they're just well off. And I think it means, and I think this is kind of important to realize, you can think about this a lot, and you can kind of make your head around, okay, maybe this is what we should do or that, but you need as an organization to figure out what is the right way for us to do this, right? Because organizations are not alike, and you need to learn what works for our organization. How do we set up the teams? Some teams it will be easier for them to adapt the technology and to understand how it works. For them, some it will be hard, and maybe it's not the people, maybe it's the process and how we build it. Maybe we have to figure out how to do it differently. Also because maybe some of the problems we have when we did it ourselves are not an issue if the throughput of Asia is so high, right? So you could maybe envision it also completely different. And I think it's really important for companies to simply put their foot in the water and say, let's go, right? We need to test this. And I think the capabilities are likely, like I'm astonished, right? You can do a lot with these. I think the hard part is bringing it on the streets, finding where you can try it already. What is the area where we can bring in this, newly onboarded agent, where we can have it run next to someone who knows the process? How can we figure out what works, what doesn't? This is not what we're touching yet, but here for sure it brings value for us. Here we need to invest more. Maybe we haven't, like you said, right, with these 170 ERPs. If you're in a position in parts of the process where you don't know if I turn this lever, this other thing breaks, that's probably not where you want to put agents on top, right? You probably want to fix some of your things. Maybe you can solve something with it. I mean, the interesting part for me, by the way, is always when I have, and that's probably not obvious if you don't work with the technology. Maybe it's interesting for the listeners. It will be a little bit of a deep dive, right? But if you have 5 people working on something, right, you have all these communication handovers. And, you see that part of the problem. You see that part of the problem. And, there's this gap, and you fill it by having a process, stitching it together. If these language models do it, it's all, so to speak, in context. They see the whole problem. Every bit of information that has been there across this whole process or decision, they can have a look at. They can correlate it. They can figure out, okay, this was the end result. But I have had all the knowledge that was available along the way, and you can analyze that and you can make use of that. You can make use of it to improve it, the process. It's a different form of transparency, right? Because if the agent is going to your employees and collecting information it needs, it's not in some email that you don't see, right? You see it, you know it. Okay, this was the information it collected. Based on this, it took this decision. So I think transparency, while it feels like a technology where you give away control and transparency, it could also be the other way around. Because it's collecting all this information and making it explicit, because it works on language, because you can look at it and see it and analyze it. Yes.
And we can trace it, right? And that's the other element, Alex. I mean, the minute this is done, and if an agent is actually working using company memory, whatever we've built, if we keep track of what pieces of company memory actually were consumed in order to drive this particular decision, what was the state of the atoms at the point in time, like the learning, did you change your mind maybe over the time? So you can also make this very traceable, very transparent to say, hey, the agent acted like this because that was the current state of all the information that was at hand. Like all this topic about auditability will not go away. You can SOX, if you are SOX compliant, you cannot run a finance process with an agent if you do not say which part of the process was actually when touched by an agent. If you don't do this today, you are non-SOX compliant.
Yeah, we have this awesome use case, right? Which is project closing. If you have to close projects as a company that does big projects, like say you do big construction projects, right? And usually you getting paid is tied to some milestones. This project closing work can't be done by an ERP. How would you ever do it, right? Today it's not possible. Back then, today it's possible actually, right? Because today you have agents. They can collect the information of the stakeholders. And when they know exactly what is the milestone that is defined, how do we do project closing in our company? What do we need to see and prove? Okay, it can go and collect all of this. It has the evidence right there, all in one place. And it can of course tell you also. I mean, this is what was so exciting when we had built this thing to talk with company memory. It can tell you, in a very pedantic way, by the way, here you're missing something still. This is not exactly how I would want it. And here you particularly phrase that you expect this to be, bulletproof. But when I look at this, I don't think it's quite there yet. And the interesting part is because it happens kind of on the one technology layer, right? It's very transparent. And I think it's a cool use case where it would be very hard to automate this, right? Without this technology. But because you can actively manage it, how do we do project closing? You can define, hey, if we have different kinds of projects, different kind of things we do, different kinds of customers, how do we want to steer this, right? And then all of a sudden you can automate it, but you can also make it transparent. So I think also for the compliance case, you can get to a point where you say, okay, we've tested this so much. Maybe you let it project close it, but you're not taking the decision automatically yet. Maybe that's a good approach for applying this to technology to parts of the process which are very either risky, high impact, right? You can run this in parallel. You can have people reason with it about why it came to the conclusion, and they are still taking the decision. And probably for many of these, you will want to keep it that way as well, right? But you are getting probably more transparency, although this is a technology which often kind of feels like it's exactly the opposite. But if you really work with it and you ask it, what are you basing this information on? Well, I saw this and this atom in company memory. This is what we have set out as a guideline. This is the information I get from this PDF document that you sent me. This person on the ground, project manager, this documentation, that documentation. So it can also, I think, become something that drives transparency and probably makes these decisions easier, lets you trace what is actually happening, understand your processes better. I think it's exciting.
Andreas, please.
So one of the things also is, do you know there's the story about the hammer, and then if the only tool you have is a hammer, then everything to you is a nail, right? That's the classic, right? And I'm I always laughed about this example because I thought it's obviously incorrect. Not everything you find is a nail that you can use a hammer with. But over the last weeks, that was pretty crazy because I was trying to apply the idea of how I understand company memory to problems that are obviously not a nail. So, but I almost came to the conclusion there's many things that look like a nail for company memory. I give you, and I think Theiss just mentioned something like this. We've done a little experiment with one of the guys who's leading a large scale S4 implementation in Denmark, and I said, hey, what if, what if you would actually take all the documents that describe how you want to run this project and what's important to you and what's important to the client, like the guardrails, all the let's say the specifications. Hey, why don't you convert them bring them into company memory? But it's all done in PDFs and PPTs and some sort of descriptions. And then he said, we are spending so much time every week with functional specifications. The team come up with something. We have committees that meet, that actually review the stuff, whether we want to do it or not. You know this much better than I do. And I said, hey, but everything they come up with is also described in a particular format, in a Word document, whatever this is. There's also something. And I said, hey, why don't you do a pre-check? Why don't you do a pre-check of what the people come up with to see where does it fit, or is there anything is there information missing? Is there something like ambiguous or unclear? And we've just done this blind example almost like 2 months ago, like much prior to SAPPHIRE. And the guy who's actually spending hours every week on these sessions and who's created many of the guidelines, he described company memory as to be pedantic. He said, yeah, I know where it's getting it from, but well, that's okay. I mean, it even spotted this one. So this, to me, just mentioned maybe everything is a nail. No, it's not, of course. But look, there's so many different thoughts people have. Come across a radio interview about the German law, put the law into company memory, said, hey, can I validate whether job postings are actually in line with the AGG, the law in Germany that describes on how you better make sure that you do not do any type of discrimination? And the answer is, well, it works pretty well. It's telling you, look, this is conformant and stuff like this. So it's pretty. See, I'm too crazy for this, and I'm glad that other people are down to earth and saying, let's take first steps. But it's weird because everyone we talk to, and it's also in our own organization, like our CFO Dominic Assam, when he heard about it and he thought he understood it, he said, I want company memory to work on my deal approvals. Like there's so many different things we need to adhere to, but there's also so much in people's heads on how we decide, can we leverage this here where we build AI assistants and agents all over the place? Ever so fascinating. So yeah, you can think so big, but we can use it today. We will learn a lot. There are many open questions, things we don't know, things we have to find out. We're super keen. That's just way too fascinating, I just think.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially if certain approvals, not the real critical ones, but the typical pain in the ... steps. Yeah, when they are then turned away from actual people but put into company memory and get automated. And I think this would lower the depression rates in corporate in corporate workforce by numbers, definitely. And I think this would be a great use case. But what you also have to... Yes, Theiss.
I'll double click on this because what I also found really exciting, I had this example with a data center, right? If you bring the transparency to the person, how can I actually get this done, what I want to get done, very early on? They're not wasting all this time trying stuff which doesn't work, which is the depressing. The depressing part is there's an information gap all the time. And you're kind of thinking this has to work, right? No, it doesn't. Someone tells you this is actually not, you cannot get this reimbursed. I just had this, by the way, with something. So you spend hours on a busy day. You have your kids at home, stuff to do. At least that's how it is for me, right? I feel like sometimes, right, we build this, we live in a society where we have all this stuff, right? Just to keep the lights on, it's so much work as a society.
Absolutely.
To keep this living standard on. It's so much work, right? And if you work at a company and you're in the weeds, right? It's just so much headache and so much work. I often feel like I'm an optimist. I do fear about what AI will mean for the workforce, but it's also certain that it's just so much work to keep the lights on at the moment, right?
Absolutely.
And you notice this, right? You notice this as people,
every day.
less kids, right? Every day, yeah. People are stressed, to make it less painful probably is a really good thing.
Yeah. But I do not want to let you go before we have not discussed one point. And the one point is more or less the kind of technical stuff where all this happens. Because of course that's a question that customers ask. Then of course, even though we are talking about a very, very, very young technology, what are the technical foundations that I may have already to consider now to be then ready in a certain way? Because I guess it's not done just by installing SAP Signavio.
It would be nice.
Of course, that's the answer.
Certainly where we want to bring it.
It's a 42 answer, exactly, to anything. So how is this set up? Yeah.
No, we are building it. I mean, we are building it in a way that customers can leverage it. No matter if they've set up something already, so to speak, in Signavio or not. But I think it's a worthwhile investment because all the things that you do anyway in Signavio help you. I think if we would have company memory or not, I think what you do in Signavio, taking care of your processes, how are we actually running the business? I think this notion that process mining had for a while, that you're creating a digital twin of your organization, we're basically cranking this up times 10, right? And I think the flywheel is really, it's not just, so what you have to think about is, on the one hand side, what problem we are solving is making all these things explicit. And by the way, why can we build it now is because large language models, they can abstract and synthesize information like nothing else. I couldn't have built this if I wanted to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
So we can build it because a lot of this heavy lifting we can give to agent and large language models, and they present you the information to your user in a way that you can digest it and manage it, right? Because otherwise it would be just too big of a task. But that's just like 50% of the story. The other part of the story that you actually want to understand, okay, when we operationalize this, what's the impact, right? Is it positive, negative? Where are we running into issues that we haven't foreseen? Because, of course, humans also operationalize standard operating procedures, but not in a way that agents do, right? And if you close this information gap, you also want to measure it, right? You want to understand what's the impact on the process, the impact on process performance, on certain KPIs, what's the ROI. And I think there it makes a lot of sense to already think about, okay, how do I do continuous transformation? How do I do continuous process improvements? So I think these things are still very relevant, probably more relevant in the future, because like I said, we're cranking it up, but we're trying to build in a way where that's not, you cannot do it without, right? And I think that's important because we also, if you build a technology where you have to invest 2 years to set something up to see an ROI, this doesn't make sense. So we want to lower the barrier of entry, really, where if you have a use case in mind, we can onboard it to company memory. We try to make it simple to manage it, simple to bring the knowledge in, and then to take these steps. And one of the reasons is also because we want to learn with customers, right? I think we have all these great ideas and we have started kind of to chip away at them and build something that is useful already. But I really want to work with customers of different sizes and complexity and understand what problems can we solve already and where do we still need to make sure that we get shit done so that even the harder nuts we can crack, right? And so it's kind of this continuous.
I would say, because that was one of the questions we also had. I mean, now that you're coming up with company memory, should I now wait with something? Should I just wait for you to have something ready that I can use? And the answer is no, don't wait. Just try to build as many agents as you can. Make sure you log them nicely. But because the more agents you have, the more you will benefit immediately once you set this up. Somewhere you need to start, right? Company memory in a way is empty when you start.
Yeah.
You can bring in your code of conduct. you can bring in all sorts of different things, like to start with, to say, I better make sure that everyone who's operating in this organization, be it human or machine, follows, let's say, the way we want business to be done. So don't wait for anything, right? Just go ahead. But the minute we actually can put this amendment, all of a sudden, and you can infuse your agents via the right protocols to connect to company memory and stuff like this, you should be able to give it much more complicated tasks, right? All of a sudden, grounded in really on how you behave, like grounded in more than just what was described in the prompt or what's in, let's say, the world model's knowledge. So it's almost like it's it's giving like it's the next stage to your agents, so to say. So don't stop. I mean, don't stop doing anything. Just progress, experiment, try out things, but be aware we are building this knowledge layer that you can connect to, and that should enable you to do to give more complicated tasks, to give more trust, and to make sure that whatever is happening in your organization is actually really grounded in really on how you want to have things done, or you figure out you have not even described how you want things to be done. So then that's also a learning to say, once you've curated your memory, to say you can reflect, self-reflect, and say, do you know what? Since I'm a tennis player, I'm so cool at playing the forehand, but I somehow forgot to play my slice backhand. You know, we better train the slice backhand so that you get the skill. I don't stop with anything you do, but keep following us and use it and work with us. Work with us on making this on making this and turning this into a real advantage.
Absolutely.
And I think it's got to be an incredible advantage.
And this resonates quite a lot with, for example, what two of my customers at the moment are saying. They say, like, to be honest, they are not so much, or do not see it actually at the moment, at this actual 6 months and so on, as what kind of agents can I run? But their biggest concern is to get AI ready. Because they say, like, yeah, we have probably a lot of dead bodies in our basement, that we have to solve first, because it makes not sense to start with crazy agents without having made our homework first, and bringing the data together, getting transparency, and so all these kinds of things. And you tell this again are relevant and necessary things to do in the beginning to get in the end the horsepower to the street. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you need to build trust in these things, right? And if see, that's one of the fundamentals, right? If many organizations tried out things, they didn't provide the results. You didn't trust. You stopped the activities. Well, it's still nothing is easy, right? Let's be honest. And building agents and bringing agents into operation, making sure, hey, they really do something valuable to the organization, other than just bringing value to those who sell you the tokens. That's the other part of the story. By the way, we didn't touch on this one. Maybe there should be a second one where we believe company memory is also a way on how you can keep the amount of tokens being used under control. That's another story, maybe for next time. But really, well, this is the beginning of a journey to most of us. So don't stop. Build the things as good as you can. They will only get better. You will gain more control, and you will be able to delegate many more activities. And the more company memory, hopefully, we build, the more you will also learn about your organization. Maybe also the implausibilities that you have. Like sometimes you have just conflicting things, right? Hey, sometimes we turn left, but then we turn right. But why do we go straight? Like all these sort of things, don't stop.
Yeah,
And follow the channel.
I like the saying, there's no shortcut for experience, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's true. And the funny thing is that the best practices already or always remain best practices. Yeah, what was right yesterday is still right. And I think that's a good message. Andreas, Theiss,
Absolutely.
we will definitely have a second one, because I'm really, really looking forward to know how this evolves within the next months, and to see this kind of interesting, fascinating plan grow. Thank you very much for taking your time and joining us for this conversation. Last question, as always, when people want to get in contact with you and learn more about the stuff that you do, your exploits, your adventures in the world of company memory and AI, how it is easiest to contact you?
LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the easiest. I mean, there's a hashtag we always use for everything we do, which is hashtag company memory. It's Theiss Heilker. You find him on LinkedIn. I sometimes post, Alex, or in case they're completely lost, they should reach out to you and you make sure you establish contact. Okay, deal?
I definitely will put your profiles in the show notes here in the comment section, so it will be impossible to miss you.
And it's this was a real privilege, Alex, for having us. I mean, and let's also face it. Company memory is much bigger than just the two faces you see. There's many colleagues working, incredible smart people. There's so many doing so many great things, and also with let's say our leaders who just let us go. Andre Wenz and everyone just said, "You do podcasts with Alex and go. Just tell the world." There's so many, and the credit goes to so many. We should never forget. Only because we are talking here does not mean that there is not so many other super smart people really working hard. So thanks for having us.
Very driven
and
team.
Thank you to all the guys making this real.
Definitely. Big thanks.
Thank you.
Have a great day.